Hey there. Welcome to Healing Outside the Box. My name is Jane Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. Today is episode 249, and I'm calling it An Unexpected Consequence of Climate Change on Our Food Supply. Now, I did an episode on this topic about 4 years ago, but a lot has happened in the past 4 years, as we all know. So I'm doing an update because, quite frankly, I feel like we're all busy following the bouncing orange ball, and sometimes we lose sight of what's important. Now, 4 years ago, I came across this mind-blowing article from Politico. But before I get to consequences of climate change, I have to tell you a story about a consequence of growing organically. And that is, wait for it, squirrels. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with squirrels, which I imagine most people do. After all, they're very cute when they're chasing each other up and down trees or water skiing. By the way, if you haven't seen the video of the water skiing squirrel, I suggest you take a look, because we all need a good laugh now and again. Okay, so it's common knowledge that squirrels tend to be pests. For example, every year, and you'd think I would know this by now, but every year I put dahlia bulbs in my garden, and every year the squirrels eat them. A friend was looking out the window and laughing and saying, "Oh, Gene, look, there's Mom and Dad and the kids, they're all eating your dahlia bulbs." And again, every spring, I look forward to the time when my tulips bud and bloom, and every year the squirrels chop them off at the stem just as they're starting to bloom. But I did not see this one coming. And by this, I mean that they went after my parents' peaches. Those fluffy gray evildoers ate most of my parents' peaches last year and the years before that. It all started back in 2014 when I bought my parents a little tiny organic peach tree. It took a few years, but the tree produced 72 tiny little peaches, and then the next year 150 tiny little peaches. Now, I know this for a fact, or maybe it's an alternative fact, I don't know. But my father goes out there and counts each and every one of them. He may have lost count and started over, but I think he got close enough. Then my mother frantically called me in July, this was 4 years back, telling me that the peaches on the peach tree were disappearing. They looked on the ground, no peaches. They counted again, and every day there were fewer peaches. The evidence was mounting that there was a four-legged suspect. But who? Then one morning, my father looked out and saw a squirrel sitting on a branch on his hind feet with his two little front paws holding on to a tiny little peach. It sickens me to think of it now, but this is one of the unintended consequences of organic farming. We even tried cayenne pepper, but they waited for it to rain and then ate all the peaches. So the unintended consequences of trying to keep that peach tree organic means that we sometimes endure the suffering of watching them get eaten by those furry little evildoers. Okay, anyway, back to the mind-blowing article in Politico from 4 years ago. This article was about the fact that global warming has consequences that may still surprise us with everything that we now know. Of course, we know that CO2 levels in the atmosphere are rising, and this is resulting in many changes in our ability to sustain an adequate food supply. And let's face it, 7 billion people is a lot, and it's soon to be 8 billion. 76% of the world's population relies on plants for most of their nutritional needs. And of course, we know that droughts, floods, not to mention wildfires, destroy plenty of land that we and our four-legged friends need. But this article suggests that CO2 may directly affect the nutritional quality of edible plants. And this is the first time I'd ever seen this suggested. I'll put that Politico article in the show notes. So we apparently now have twice the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere as we did when Americans started using farm equipment like tractors. Not that long ago, actually. We also learned in junior high that CO2 is taken up by plants, So shouldn't more CO2 be great for plants? Well, one Republican from Texas was all over this, I guess like a wet blanket. He argued that lots of CO2 would be great for us because it's great for plants. Setting aside the obvious, which is that he's forgotten that people breathe oxygen, there's now the possibility that the Republicans are even wrong about high CO2 levels being great. This article in Politico reports that scientists now believe higher CO2 levels cause plants to make more glucose and less nutrients, like protein, vitamins, and minerals. This guy named Lolaz argued that rising CO2 and human nutrition were inversely linked. He had found only one research article looking at how rising CO2 levels might affect, say, the nutrients in rice. And we know that poor people around the globe look to rice for much of their nutrient and caloric needs. This research article showed a drop in zinc and iron in the rice that appeared as much as 2 decades ago. Zinc, among other things, is crucial for our functioning immune system. And who doesn't want that? Iron is a key component in the hemoglobin molecule that carries oxygen in our bloodstream. Without that, our cells will die. It appears that there were very few follow-up articles. What? And folks, there are research studies on every darn thing imaginable. How did this slip through the cracks? There's a detailed sciencey article in Nature from September of 2018, and I'll put that link in the show notes. I'll just summarize it here because it's pretty long. So if there are any Republicans listening, I digested this article so I can regurgitate it into Republicans' baby bird mouths. This article analyzed the effect on rising CO2 levels for protein, iron, and zinc in 151 different countries. Given the data they collected, they theorized that an additional 122 million people will become protein deficient, an additional 170 million people will become zinc deficient, and a whopping 1.4 billion additional people, mostly women and children, will become iron deficient, simply due to the change in CO2 emissions and what it does to plants. And that is not including crops lost to fires, droughts, and floods. So theoretically, what is changing in plants due to rising CO2 levels is the ratio of carbohydrate to nutrients. Now, right now, this is considered a minor shift in the carbohydrate to nutrient ratio. But as I like to say, what we don't know about this issue is a lot. I think I got that line from Moonstruck. Good movie, by the way. So we don't know the rate at which this problem will grow in, say, the next 40 or 50 years. So just to play devil's advocate for a minute, if we chemically add back vitamins and minerals, as we do in fortified bread products and cereals or GMO food, should we even care about this? I don't know, but lucky for us, there are scientists who are now sitting up and paying attention. It has been shown now that elevated CO2 results in lower levels of other minerals. Right now, calcium, potassium, and zinc and iron, a drop of up to 8% on average. Ditto for proteins, it appears. Researchers found that there has been a 6% drop in the protein in wheat and an 8% drop in the protein in rice over the past 40 years. This is going to be a particular problem for people in developing countries like India or Bangladesh, who rely on rice for much of their protein needs. Not to mention the fact that I hear nearly 1/4 of southern Bangladesh is now underwater due to climate change. Lower zinc and protein levels put pregnant women and infants most in jeopardy, again in developing countries. Not to mention the rise of anemia in those developing countries. In the past 4 years, I saw that B vitamins are now put on the same list as nutrients that are decreasing in our plant food. Here in the U.S., the problem might not be the decrease in nutrients, but the increase in sugars in these edible plants. Harvard put out a press release about this that is short and, well, not so sweet, and I'll give you a link to that in the show notes. A guy named Samuel Myers, who is a climate researcher at Harvard, says, quote, "This is the tip of the iceberg. It's been hard for us to get people to understand how many questions they should have," end quote. And I don't suppose anyone has to tell us that obesity and diabetes are ever-expanding problems in this country. There's another article from a PBS show called Here and Now. I'll put the link to that in the show notes. Here's what it says. There's a guy formerly from the USDA named Louis Ziska, Z-I-S-K-A. He is looking at a weed called goldenrod that is just considered a nuisance for allergy sufferers in the fall. It's not so much a nuisance for honeybees, however, who feast on this goldenrod and use it for their protein needs to get the little honeybees through the winter months. It was, I imagine, exciting for this guy to study goldenrod, and I find it exciting that someone finds it exciting because it has been growing wild and ignored by GMO chemists since it is not an edible plant. They found that the protein content in goldenrod has decreased by 1/3 since the Industrial Revolution. That may be a snooze for us, but it's very important for honeybees, who have been hit by aerial spraying of pesticides and so many other things that we are doing to those poor little creatures. And I suppose it comes to no one's surprise that if these poor little creatures die out, they can't pollinate what we eat. It's that simple. Ziska's work suggests that the decline in the protein content of that plant that they feed off might contribute to the decline in the honeybee population. Oh, by the way, Ziska is one of 6 scientists that Trump tried to silence. If you've noticed that I'm a little bit irritated at the Republicans right now, you would be correct. So Louis Ziska is saying that we haven't yet discovered how many different ways the rising CO2 levels can affect edible plants. In other words, we don't know what we don't know. The scientists made another point. Because it's our planet collectively, we all need to work together on this. In other words, climate scientists have to work with botanists, who have to work with honeybee people, who have to work with nutritionists, that would be me, who have to work with public health officials. And we'll have to, and by we I mean everybody, we have to come together to put pressure on politicians, some of whom like to bring a snowball into the Senate chamber to prove that God can make snow and, therefore, there is no such thing as climate change. There was a review article in Advances in Science that gets into what happens when climate change hits the microorganisms in the soil. I know this sounds boring, but hang in there with me. The microbes in the soil will affect the microorganisms in the microbiome of your gut. And that's important because it appears about 20% of us have some gastrointestinal issues. I like to get on my soapbox about this topic because it is microorganisms in the soil that help make nutrients, flavor compounds, and assist our own guts to be in balance. And who doesn't want that? What I'm saying here, or trying to, is that there is a beneficial relationship between soil, microorganisms, and plants, or specifically the nutrient content of the plant. That is now getting screwed up. While I'm on the subject of screwed up, using liquid anhydrous ammonia fertilizer derived from ammonium nitrate bomb material has the added effect of killing earthworms and beneficial soil microorganisms. That industrial fertilizer from World War II needs to go away. The best fertilizer for the soil is broken down plants, which we call composting, not a new concept. Horses, cows, and sheep have been pooping out fertilizer for quite a while now, and of course they're plant eaters too. I had an episode recently reviewing a documentary called The Need to Grow, which talks about the fact that Not only is compost healthier, it can also provide a renewable energy source, and it reduces CO2 levels because it's taking out dead plants from landfills and putting them back into the soil. I'll put that episode in the show notes as well. I forgot to mention this 4 years ago, but climate change also hurts the diversity of plant species. If you throw a drought or a flood on top of all of these changes, that may change what fungi or bacterial growth is in the soil, and that will affect this delicate balance. For the past 2 years, I've had mushrooms growing all over the front lawn outside my apartment building. And when I point this out to people, they look at me and say, "Is that not supposed to happen?" With what's going on in the GMO world, we need as much diversity as we can get. Otherwise, we can get the soil equivalent of a jellyfish situation, a strong but negative outgrowth of one particular species. Which brings me back to that darn squirrel eating a peach in my parents' peach tree. As much as my evil twin wanted to spray his fat little face with DDT, the answer cannot be more pesticides or insecticides, bomb chemicals, coal burning, and GMOs. Those are the actions that got us into this mess in the first place. I've been thinking about this lately. This spring might be a perfect time to start an outdoor school curriculum around learning how to grow organic food from the composting, which means they learn about composting, soil enrichment, planting, harvesting, all outdoor activities that can be done in the school, on the school grounds. Then they could bring the food in and learn how to cook healthy food for school lunches. All part of what they need to learn to get along in the world over the next 50 years. And perhaps the indoor classroom can include nutrition classes about why we need to include plant protein, iron, zinc, and why we need to prevent obesity, diabetes, and irritable bowel syndrome. And let's face it, nothing makes me crankier than irritable bowels. So understanding the larger picture is what all of these brilliant scientists are now starting to do. And I, for one, am glad these people are opening our eyes to see our way out of this, even if it means tolerating honeybees and squirrels. That's all I have for you today. Be well and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.